Welcome back to my series where I help you build decks so good that it feels like cheating. You submit decks, and I help you make them better, more consistent, and more fun. And today we're looking at Riku of Many Paths, which was a commission on coffee from Matt. Keep watching and you'll learn how I think as I teach you all about deck building from my 30 years of Magic experience through the vehicle of deck requests. You should leave with more knowledge to help you perfect your own decks in just the way that you want them. You know, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish and all of that. So stick around and you'll see just what I told Matt to have him react like this. If this is your first time watching one of these, we'll look at Riku, then review Matt's request, and then I'll walk through my ideas or suggestions on how to improve the deck and look at cards that I think could be worth considering. Riku is a 3/3 Temur human wizard, and is all about casting a whole lot of modal spells, and then profiting from it. Whenever we cast the modal spell, we get to do one, two, or all of his abilities, each of which sends us in very different directions. We either get Impulse Draw, or get to pump Riku up and give him Trample, or we get to make a 1/1 flying bird. Now when I get a request for help, I immediately ask a few questions to help me diagnose what about a deck can or needs to be improved. Things like, what do you want your deck to do and what is your game plan? How does your deck win, and with which key cards or types of cards? On what turn does it ideally win with no disruption? And what do you like about your deck or what's wrong with it that's making you request this review? The process of coming up with clear, concise answers to these questions, even if you're self-diagnosing your own decks, will usually highlight most of the issues that the deck faces and make finding solutions, either in play patterns or specific cards, much easier. And in line with those questions, here was Matt's brief for me. This is a tempo control deck, and the goal is building up a reliable source of mana generation and controlling any threats, while slowly chipping away with ping damage, bird attackers, or trampling commander damage. The deck ideally wins via ping damage from cards like Gutter Snipe and Fiery Inscription, helped along by casting several spells with Arcane Bombardment. It can also win via commander damage with Riku, utilizing Trample with cards like Twin Phono or Great Train Heist. And the deck can also win by powering out an army of bird attackers puffed up by Octavia or Titania's Command. Cards like Veyran, Harmonic Prodigy, Reverse the Polarity, and even the +3 from Eternal Wildspeaker all help further these win conditions. I would ideally like to start threatening a win from around turn 6 or 7, given I want to play it in bracket 3, because bracket 3 is where this deck feels most at home to me. Although I have considered the idea of grabbing a sideboard of 10 or so strong combo options that can be swapped in when playing with some of my friends' fringe CEDH decks. Despite the deck's ability to be versatile due to the modal spells and Riku's ability, sometimes it struggles to set itself up and runs out of gas. I'm aware it needs more mana and card draw options, but I'm having trouble making the hard decision because I enjoy playing so many of the cards and I want a non-biased opinion. Lastly, it's important to me that I don't lose too much of the core modal spell suite if I can help it, unless the payoff is considerable, because I find the modal spells are what make this deck truly unique. Okay, that was a really good brief and we'll get stuck into the deck list in just a second, but first I have a very cool announcement. I'm going to be heading to PAX Australia this weekend, from the 10th to the 12th of October for a weekend full of Magic the Gathering shenanigans. Just get a load of all of this. To start, the one and only Gavin Verhey will be making a rare Aussie appearance. Catch his keynote on Friday, his meet and greet on Sunday, or catch him across the weekend at the Magic the Gathering booth in the Tabletop Hall. There will also be learn to plays, Spider-Man welcome decks, artist signings, and a whole lot more. Arguably just as important given you're watching my video, is that I'll be competing in a Commander Showdown presented by PAX Australia, eBay, and of course Magic the Gathering that happens at 2 PM on Friday. Catch me playing Commander live for the very first time, as I face off against Gavin, Ifinwa Diwe, and fellow Aussie creator Ruby Plays. And for the majority of you that won't be at PAX Australia, this will be live streamed, so you can watch me crash out in 4th place in spectacular fashion. This will be followed by an open tabletop event on the Friday evening, and I'll be hanging out, playing Commander, and possibly crashing out in spectacular fashion in 4th place against you. As if that wasn't enough, Gavin's also hosting the PAX Pauper Bash on the Saturday evening from 7 PM. I've just built my first Pauper deck, and I'm super excited to get my 1v1 hands dirty for the first time in a very long time. There's also a bunch more Magic content across the weekend, and you can find all of it on the schedule on the PAX Oz website. Last but not least, for the first 50 or so people that manage to find me and say hello, I'll have a very limited number of frog stickers and pins to give away, so find me and get them before they're gone. Okay, back to the deck review. Let's take a look at the deck list, and I'm going to share my thoughts as I work through the deck. When I call out a specific card, I'm usually calling out a particular play pattern or theme that the card represents in this deck, rather than just a judgment on that particular card in isolation. So right off the bat, this deck looks incredibly fun, is well built, and has a lot going for it. That said, I think I can see why the deck may run out of gas. This deck looks very similar to my Aragorn spellslinger deck, and I've had the same problem there. We have so many cool spells, but very few actually generate card advantage. And this is exacerbated by the fact that so many of our spells tend to be interactive. We're either protecting something or interacting with someone to solve a problem for the table. We trade 1-for-1 with that single player, and this means that the other players, having spent no resources in the exchange, come out ahead in card advantage. This means we need to do one of three things: either include vanilla card draw spells, or include engines that allow us to draw cards whenever we cast spells, or need to be able to recur spells from our graveyard, or at best, all three. When I suggest cards, I'll narrow down which of these I think we should use here. The nature of modal spells means the deck is jam-packed full of interesting, flexible cards and effects. This, however, creates a problem, as this wide range of diverse effects can see our deck suffer due to a lack of focus. Having a commander that provides multiple strategies on top of that can lead us even further into diversifying our strategy or game plan too much. In this deck, our modal cards are our whimsy and are taking up a lot of space, so that means we need to be hyper selective with the non-modal card slots that we do have. I think trying to fit in on-cast ping lines, go wide bird lines, and Voltron commander win cons is spreading the few slots that we have for non-modal cards way too thin. A deck is focused and strong because of what we remove, not because of what we add, so I'm likely going to recommend cutting at least one of these three lines of play. I want to call out that I'm really not a fan of the blast spells here. To me, the benefit of the modal spells is that their effects are almost always going to be useful, and I feel that depending on the pod, these are way too narrow in bracket 3 and they'd often just sit in my hand. Your mileage may vary, but I'm probably going to recommend removing them. Cost reducers are interesting here. I think they are game breaking when they do one of two things. Either they enable us to play a winning combination of a select number of cards far earlier than we should, like in a combo deck, or we have enough card advantage engines that we're able to abuse that cost reduction. They're also infinitely better when we play many small spells or stack the cost reduction. We don't really have either of those situations active in this deck, and if we don't have the card advantage engines, we're just going to end up emptying our hand in a turn, making a mild impact on the game, and then the cost reducers are effectively just situationally better rampant growths. So depending on what we do or don't do in the card advantage department, I may recommend removing them. Speaking of ramp, I think we're in a fairly similar situation there. A 3-mana commander and a fairly low mana curve means we're potentially ramping into absolutely nothing. I love the synergy between our Seagull creation engine and the command zone, and something like Sorcerer class and Enduring Vitality, but much like the cost reducers, we could end up in a situation where we have tons of mana and nothing to spend it on. I think it's important that we balance cost reduction and ramp with the good stuff to cast, and we'll need to find that balance. I think rather than ramping, I'd prefer to have mana open in turns 2 and 4 to interact and slow others down. All this said, I'm likely going to recommend cutting a lot of the ramp. I think the mana base is incredibly greedy and needs a bunch of work, especially considering that there are a bunch of tapped lands and utility lands that make accessing the right colors in our early turns that much harder. Something like Reliquary Tower doesn't make too much sense to me because right now, drawing an alarmingly large number of cards isn't really part of our game plan. I can see the deck does have tons of ramp effects, but that doesn't solve the fact that we need to cast them and have the right mana to cast them in the early turns. I've goldfished a bunch of hands and I found having a reasonable opening hand with the right mana was pretty difficult. I feel like I'm missing something with Teferi Master of Time, and this is similar for Ginger Taxis. In the case of Jin, I get that he's strong, but at 7 mana is wildly at odds with the rest of our deck, and we don't get to cast the copies of the spells he makes, meaning we don't get to Riku trigger. This is in contrast with a spell like Arcane Bombardment, which while expensive, will be game-winning if it sticks around, especially given the amount of instants in our deck. Given so much of our strategy is tied to Riku, something I want to make sure of is that we have enough protection spells. I know there are a bunch of these effects in the modal spells, but I feel like we're probably at least 4 to 5 protection spells away from having enough in our deck. I'm going to challenge some of the expensive modal spells. Yes, they trigger Riku multiple times, but if a spell is costing us 5 to 6 mana in bracket 3, it needs to be, for the lack of a better word, game-changing. Cards like Titania's Command, Seasons of the Bold, and to a degree Sublime Epiphany just aren't doing enough. Seasons of Weaving at least synergizes with a potential token-heavy strategy and can thus act as a mostly one-sided board wipe effect. And Seasons of Gathering can fill our hand because of a big Riku. With all this in mind, these are the cuts that I would make, highlighted by the red X's. The yellow question marks note cards that I'm on the fence about. In short, I think what we're going to want to do here is likely cut some of the ramp and fix our mana base, including adding some more lands. We're going to want to cut some of the expensive, less impactful spells and focus on lowering the curve to play into that tempo style. We're obviously also going to want to fix our card advantage issues, and last but not least, we're going to want to focus and pick our win-con or win-cons and invest much more heavily into them. If I had to visualize how I'd focus Riku, it would look like this on one of my trusty character sheets. You'll notice that in the top right there is no mention of ping damage, and that's because I think that the strongest win condition in the deck is Riku's commander damage, followed by a board of pumped birds. I don't think that the pinging strategy is explosive enough to reliably close out games by turn 7 in bracket 3, especially if we're splitting focus on multiple paths to winning. We would need multiple pinging effects in play before casting our spells, and then we'd likely need to be casting 10 or more spells to really make an impact, and that's just far too slow. At least with the other two options, whether it's a tall Riku or a wide board of birds, we can build up to them across turns 4 to 6, and then play some impactful spells to turn that board into a real threat from turn 7 onwards. I think we can heavily invest into either of these, or perhaps both, which is what I will try to do to keep the spirit of the original list intact. I will, however, say that I think the strongest version of this deck commits to one win line instead of a split focus. What this then translates to into our deck is a lot of interaction to help us control the tempo of the game and to do enough to slow others down till we can strike. Then I think we want to make sure that we have enough protection, card draw, and then sets of cards to support our Voltron and Bird win cons. Naturally, as many of the spells as possible would be modal spells to trigger Riku, but ideally, most of our modal spells need to have at least one mode that fits into one of these buckets. Here is a short list of cards that I made and considered in line with the focus areas on the previous page. Typically when I review a deck and decide I want a certain type of card, I'll go ferreting around to find a whole bunch of effects of that type. I then cut back the cards to only include the best ones or the ones that fit my game plan. It's quite likely I've overlooked some individual cards, but the types of cards I've included should give the right direction to find others. And I'll go through the cards that I did end up including in just a second. But before we get to the final deck list, if you're enjoying this, I cook up videos like this that help you think differently about Commander. Videos that help you build better decks, play better, and have more fun. If you want more of that, like the video to tell the algorithm that you think it's good, and subscribe to make sure that my next banger gets delivered directly into your eyeballs. Here's the final deck list, the decisions I made, and why I made them. I've tried to go for additions and a final list that I would find enjoyable to play, that keeps as closely to the original list as possible whilst also solving some of the problems. I'll start with the broad strokes, and we'll then talk about the specific card choices. Overall, I've dived much deeper into the burn strategy, and I've added in cards that aim to create more reliable explosiveness. This is probably the biggest structural change in how the deck plays. When I looked at interaction, I feel we already had many ways to interact with the game. For additions, I think Cryptic Command came in rather than Archmage's Charm because it does more things that we want. The triple blue pips do scare me a little bit though. Heritage Reclamation came in as a direct swap over Return to Nature because the exile part can also draw us a card. I think the value of Hull Breach is far too strong to overlook, especially because we want modal spells. For protection, I felt that we wanted more cheap, strong protection. Secret Identity, Defend the Rider, Wild Shape, and Untimely Malfunction all fulfill these roles as modal spells. 3 Steps Ahead is a little bit more expensive, but can do more, particularly in drawing and filtering cards, or if we get lucky, in copying a Murmuring Mystic. Fierce Guardianship is also a solid addition both as protection and general interaction. For card advantage, I brought in Jesk as well. Despite the fact that it's impulse draw, it's simply far too strong to ignore. I also brought in Trash the Town as a modal spell, which does tons of things that we want and can allow us to draw cards. Far more importantly, I've taken the rest of our card advantage in a bird-fueled direction. Skullclamp is pretty much a no-brainer. I've also added in Frostcliff Siege that can turn a few birds into repeatable card advantage. I've also added in Airborne Aid, Distant Melody, and Winged Portent to turn our wide board of birds into a handful of cards. Given our focus on birds, there are also some token synergies. For example, I've brought in Hermes to help us make both more birds, not to mention making them scry, which is incredibly strong. Goblin Surprise and Mishra's Onslaught both allow us to power up our board and our modal spells, as do Shared Animosity and Beastmaster Ascension, both of which will turn a board of 10 birds into at least 2 players dying. Obelisk of Erd is similar but slightly worse, and lastly, Cryptolith Rite comes in as another mana generator. That effect is highly desired given I've taken out the single ramp cards. There are also a few general good stuff cards that I feel the deck wants. The first is Bloom Tender. I know I said that we don't want ramp, but Bloom Tender into our commander is far too strong not to play. Quandrix Apprentice is also great, and Roaming Throne set to wizards gives us double triggers for Riku, Quandrix, Murmuring Mystic, and Hermes. This seemed like a budget-conscious mana base, so I brought in a bunch of budget-focused lands that I think make for a better mana base. I've also included some MDFCs in the case of Sink into Stupor, Salundi Vision, and Bridgeworks Battle. The deck will likely play a little bit differently to how it did before, as I feel like it had a few more proactive turn 2 plays. That said, I feel like the actual impact of those plays had a minimal impact on the game. Right now, the primary thing I'm doing when goldfishing is hitting land drops and building out a board of birds, then aiming to turn them sideways for the win. Because of this, cards like Sorcerer class put in a ton of work, and the most explosive games happen where I pair a bunch of tokens with one of those mana generators. I still feel like the strongest or most explosive games will be based around Riku's commander damage, and that we may well decide we want to prioritize that over birds, but I didn't want to do that so the deck isn't one-dimensional. If we did want to take the deck in that direction, I feel like 1/1 counter doublers like Fangs of Colonia will make Riku very scary very fast. Having goldfished a bunch of games, I don't know if this deck list has turn 6 to 7 win potential. I think it's probably 2 to 3 turns slower. This is partially because I think a commander like Riku has some natural limitations in power that create a ceiling, and his is low to mid bracket 3. Especially if we build around his core abilities and don't just forgo that for more standard combo based wins. All that said, given all the interaction in our deck, we should be able to slow others down in bracket 3 so that they're not winning that early either. That way our turn 7 to 9 win should be fast enough. One thing that did feel a little bit off to me was how reactive the deck was, though this is often the case when goldfishing a reactive, interaction-filled deck. I felt that turns 1 to 2 often felt a little bit wasted, but I don't see any way of changing that unless we take out a bunch of modal spells. I went back and looked at the original list, and it seemed that most of the early plays were ramp, which would still really only set us up for a slightly stronger turn 4. This doesn't really seem any different from the original list, so perhaps that's fine. If I was going to add early drops, it would be mana dorks like Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling, because powering out a turn 2 Riku would make a big difference in how the deck feels and plays. The problem there is that we would then have to block out 12 slots in the deck to make that happen reliably. And I really don't like that here, especially when we have a split focus on win condition, because those cards are going to be dead draws any other time. Lastly, let's talk power. Matt mentioned wanting a sideboard to make the deck more powerful in certain situations. I think there are 2 directions one can go. One is generic high power combos and some tutors, things like Stellarly and Twisted Fealty, or dual cast the mage shenanigans. I feel like both of those would lose the identity of the deck, and I still don't think they'd be strong enough to compete with other high powered decks. If we did want to make the deck more powerful, I would probably just go all in on commander damage. If we did, then sources of damage amplification are things that we want to add. I've already mentioned cards like Fangs of Colonia, but things like Assault Strobe, Bulk Up, Critical Hit, Raking Claws, Spectacular Showdown, Teemo Battle Rage, and Unleashed Fury are all good additions. In that world, cheap or free protection is going to be key, so stuff like Not of This World and Deflecting Swat would also be good additions. All that said, I think certain decks have power levels at which they perform best, and I think this style of deck is best in bracket 2 or 3 and not in higher power. The kinds of wins we would face in bracket 4 are far too efficient, and the Voltron will struggle when we're knocking out maybe one player on turn 5 or 6, but someone else is just outright winning the game at the same time. Matt, in the spirit of my reviews, I obviously leave you to take all of this information and make your own final decisions and tweaks. I think this is as close to the ceiling of what this deck can do in its current style, unless we cut back to a single style of win condition or change the win conditions entirely. But as I said, I'll leave that tinkering to you. If you, dear viewer, want to submit your own decks for future episodes, hop into the brewing channel in my Discord and follow the instructions. Or become one of my patrons on Patreon to jump the rapidly growing queue and get access to a whole bunch of other cool stuff too. If you want more personal tailored help, or you're just horribly rich and want to jettison some money, you can find that over on Ko-fi. All of which you can find the links to down below the like button. I hope you found this useful, and if you have thoughts on this build or think there's a banger card that I missed, yeet yourself at the comments right meow. Or come join the yappening in the base deck department Discord. If you enjoyed this, go and watch one of these videos, and as always, thank you for being here.